everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Independent Thought. My name is Desmond Price. And for today's episode, we are once again joined by January Walker, congressional candidate for Utah's 4th District. January, how are you doing today? Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Desmond, I'm amazing today. Thank you so much for having me back again.
Absolutely. So, in our ongoing series here, I wanted to have you come on, just talk about some more subjects about your campaign, about the state of Utah, Congress, the country, so on and so forth. We had planned on talking about something different today, but obviously with the recent developments of the Supreme Court overturning Roe V Wade and throwing all of the, abortion, quote unquote, rights back to the states, I feel like it is the number one issue in America right now. It's a topic that everyone's talking about. And so it feels as though for someone who is running for office, we should be talking about this issue specifically. So let me get you on the record with this.
Yeah, perfect.
Where do you stand as far as what the Supreme Court did? As far as them overturning it, do you think it was the right decision? You're in a state, Utah, that has one of these trigger laws where I think of as of, the 11th of July, it's going to be going into effect. What are your thoughts on all of this? And do you think the court made the right decision?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question because my response is not going to be a typical two-sided response, because the issue, and I think that the majority of our viewers would agree that the issue is incredibly complex. So the first, to answer the first part of your question, I'm very concerned around the legislation that we've been seeing coming from the different states. Utah is one of these states. I know at the Republican convention earlier this year that they actually discussed putting it to a vote to even remove the protections that we have today. So protections being in the instance of loss of life of the mother or rape or incest, right? So they were considering putting forth an all-out ban, and what they opted to do instead was to vote not to vote on it at that time. So those are the kind of individuals that are driving these laws. When it comes specifically to the Supreme Court, I personally believe that when we were originally fighting for women's rights, that we should have taken the time to actually build the foundation around women's rights. So instead of just having one sweeping piece of legislation, making it so that we have the basics covered. And I can go into that if you want, or we can lead with your next question.
No, please go ahead. Go into it.
Perfect. So the basics in my mind are the things that we can agree on. So a couple of months ago, I was able to talk with pro-lifers that were passionate enough to show up at a pro-choice protest. And so you have two polarized groups, very, very angry, very frustrated, very upset. And at this experience, they started chanting back and forth with each other, but they were very polite. It was kind of unusual where one group would chant and then wait patiently, and then the other group would chant their chant back and then wait patiently, and they just volleyed this back and forth a few times, which was kind of hilarious if you're on the outside looking in, right? And if it wasn't such a serious issue, but I was able to take the pro-life group aside, and initially they weren't interested in talking with me, but just through being like, hey, let's have an open conversation, listening to them and that kind of thing, I was able to get them to agree to join the pro-choicers to champion pro-womenens rights. And I think that is the foundation and the baseline and the common ground, because it's like 94% of the population agrees that in instances of the life of the mother, rape, incest, if the child is going to have a very painful pregnancy that they know will end with the loss of that child, right? So this is the baseline that needed to be established. And I'm going to add one more thing into this, which is bounty hunting women. Like, we don't need any bounty hunting. So establishing those baseline laws across the United States should have been where we started, instead of coming in with a piece of legislation a court decision that could have been overturned. right? Based off of who was in the court at the time. So I think that, the moment that we had prohibition repealed, we should have recognized that any of those amendments could have been repealed, and including this one.
Okay, let me go a little bit of a step further here. The courts, has ruled in this. I think it was a 6-3, ruling. Go ahead and like throwing it back to the states. Now people have said like, oh, this should be a states' rights issue, when it comes to something like this. And I find that to be a little bit odd that, we say that certain quote unquote civil rights, should be states' issues and others shouldn't be states' issues. Where do you fall on that specifically? Do you think that abortion access should be granted like unilaterally throughout the entire country? Like the entire country should operate under the same set, kind of like how we had with the Roe v. Wade precedent? Or do you think it should be on a state by state issue?
I think that really what it comes down to is establishing that baseline level of protection for all Americans, right? There shouldn't, and I know that this isn't quite the same terminology that you're referring to the conversation, right? But access determination should be available, and it should be at the provider's discretion and based off of the information that's there. Because when we look at some of these laws that say, you have to go through with an ectopic pregnancy, and whether this one is on the books or it's just being proposed right now, the point is that it's being put out there, right? And so that is a risk to many of these individuals that are experiencing pregnancy. But if you have an ectopic pregnancy, it's non-viable, and it puts the life of the mother at risk. And even if it only happens 1% of the time or once ever, like that's unacceptable to say you get to choose the option between death and between going to prison for 30 years, 20, 30 years, right? So we have to establish what level of rights we would like to see for our citizens across the United States. And I personally don't think that is an acceptable choice for any American, period.
So I hear what you're saying. Now I kind of want to get a little more personal with you about this.
Okay.
Like for you specifically, do you find yourself more in the like pro-choice camp or in the pro-life camp, or is it to a certain extent, like choice up to a certain extent? Like I know that there are certain places right now in the country that are like, we're going to go with a ban after 15 weeks. We see that in Virginia, for instance. That's currently the law of the land. In Florida. I think these are important issues that people kind of like need to kind of like suss out. I think Chief Justice Roberts, for instance, there was an opinion that came out about him that said that he originally wanted to have it be a 15-week marker, but the rest of the conservative justices pushed for a complete overturning. Where do you sit with this? And do you think that there should be access for people across the board, or should it be limited to a certain amount? Like where do you fall onto that line?
I just don't believe that the government should be mandating childbirth. Like this is a healthcare issue, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. And when we look at individuals that that go one way or the other. So me personally, like, have I had an abortion? Would I ever have an abortion? It's most likely not. But like, what if I was going to pass away, right? Like, I think that if I was forced into making that decision and understanding that there's no probability for this fetus to come out alive in myself. So I think that that's more of the complexity of it, because you could say I'm both pro-life and pro-choice in this. Like I said, would I choose it for myself? No, but I don't believe that the government should be making these decisions. And I want to get into the portion about state rights and who's actually controlling at the state level when we talk about this throughout our conversation. But I think that there are limitations, right? And I know that some people would disagree that there aren't limitations, but I think a reasonable individual would say, if you have a child that is going to make it, they're going to be born, and things like that, that you wouldn't just go in and cut that life off after a certain point, right? But I wouldn't say that I would be the expert to determine when that certain point is. I would trust the healthcare providers that are experts in their field to be making that choice.
Okay. So there is a strange intersectionality here between talking about this decision by the courts and how the states are going to implement their new laws here and technology. A conversation that I know that you are very, like fluent in. I see you talking all the time about blockchain voting, things of that nature. There is an interesting intersectionality between these two topics. We're going to get into that right when we come back from this break. So everyone just go ahead and stay tuned. Welcome back from the break, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us through this episode of Independent Thought. So before the break, I had teased the fact that there's kind of an intersectionality between, what happened with the abortion, with Roe v. Wade being overturned and technology, something that I know that you talk about quite a lot, blockchain voting, which I'm sure we will get into more again in the future when we are speaking in future iterations. But one of the things that we are seeing right now, this is coming through various different reports that that law enforcement agencies in these different states, might be using things like search histories or tracking people's data on their apps to see like if they're looking for abortion clinics or abortion pills, so on and so forth. And then using this data, this information to go ahead and go after people who might be crossing state lines to get abortions, who might be seeking abortion pills coming through the mail. It seems like an incredible breach of privacy. And I think it kind of like parallels to conversations that we've seen elsewhere about how much privacy should we have with our data and how the governments, and that can be, federal government or states governments, being able to go into our data and then use that basically against us, almost in a minority report situation. That's what we're seeing right now. Like, what are your thoughts on this? And do we need federal legislation in order to protect people's data rights?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually very glad that you brought up this part of the conversation, because the rest of it was abortion is a symptom of the problem. It's not actually the solution itself. And so when we look at personal privacy, you absolutely 100% have a right to your data and your information, and the expectation that people aren't tracking you and following you. And this is something that we messed up in the past with the legislation that we put out specifically in the Web 2 space. And Web 2 is like Facebook, Instagram, that kind of thing. So that is all Web 2 technology. And now we're at the point of Web 3, where there's a decentralization of information and you control all your information yourself. And this isn't technology that we have to push for. It's already in the works. It's not in the works because of Roe v. Wade or anything like that. And personal privacy is something that's like extremely foundational to me, like even before any of this happened, because the gross negligence of our legislatures in creating protections around American citizens, especially since 9/11, has just been a terrible mistake. And those legislatures are still in office today, making laws for us still. And they're about to make laws for Web3 and determining whether or not, police officers and law enforcement can have this information, which technically they can, right? You can go through, you can find this information, you can data mine it, and then you can obtain appeals and whatnot. So we have solutions that are going to come to the table and that will protect you and disrupt industries and save us money and do everything that we should have done 20 years ago.
Right. So I guess like just go a little bit of a step further. Do you think there should be federal legislation that protects everyone from this type of like acquisition of their data in general? Or do you think that there should be some level of police, law enforcement being able to have access to this? Like where is the line drawn?
No, there's absolutely no reason that your government should be tracking you on things like this. Healthcare, like what's in your mind, like thoughts, heart, whatever that is, they should not be tracking you on these things. And let me let me take it a little bit further just to kind of explain why, right? Because everybody's they're thinking, well, this is the abortion conversation, and if you're pro-choice, you may be like, yeah, where does that extend to? And if you're an individual that aligns on the pro-life side, you're probably thinking, no, we should absolutely have access to that to prevent people from breaking the law. But really, it comes down to something more extreme and nefarious than this. So today you have a digital image. So with your phone, right, how you walk, so the gait of your walk, how you hold your phone, how you type on your phone, how you speak, all of this has a biometric footprint, and it's called a behavioral biometric footprint. And so you essentially have a digital image of yourself, and that extends into the physical data that you're aware of, like, oh, I keep all my notes here, and I track on this level, and your healthcare stuff and everything. So you have this entire digital footprint about you, and that's able to be sold to people, to anybody, and there's no protections for you as of currently. And it's I was talking to a company last year that was offering me employment, and the extent of how they use the data just made me so sick to my stomach. It's like, this is unethical. Like, you shouldn't be doing this. And with that, they know everything about you. And so I tried going into my data and tracking it and finding out where it was going, right? Because this is all information in your phone. As soon as you click those like terms and conditions, you don't know where the data is going. It's off out in the ethos. So with that, when I couldn't track my data past a certain point, that's when it became alarming, because you find companies like MasterCard. Like, why would a company like MasterCard be buying up your behavioral biometric data, right? Or why would they need any of your data that's in your phone, period? Or, knowing these things about, like, they shouldn't know, right? It's even beyond the Roe v. Wade conversation where they shouldn't know. So even though the Supreme Court may not think that personal privacy is a fundamental human right, I 100% disagree on that level alone. And that is something that you should have access to, and police officers shouldn't be in your personal business, because at the end of the day, it's not just police officers, that's another person that is violating your right to personal privacy.
Okay. I appreciate you taking the time to kind of like go into that and say specifically like why we do need these rights to be maintained, because it feels as though right now we're living in a time where our rights are just kind of more and more being eroded. I mean, especially in the privacy sector. I think, again, you pointed like absolutely, like since 9/11, since basically the abject, of the Patriot Act, like everything has gone downhill ever since then. And it seems as though people have become more and more accustomed to it. But there has to be a line that has to be drawn, because at a certain point, it feels like people aren't going to have any privacy anywhere. I would hope that more people would be upset about this and want to talk about this. And hopefully lawmakers want to protect us from that inevitable conclusion that it seems like they were going towards. So thank you for talking about that. January, where can more people find out about you and your campaign online?
Yeah, so you can find more out about me on my website. It's January. And you can also find me on any of the social medias, which is just at Utah Politician. So take your pick between TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and that extends to like Clubhouse. We do spaces. We have a lot of conversations around this. And I always try and answer questions as openly and as honestly as humanly possible, so that it's 100% authentic when you receive this information.
All right. Thank you so much. And January will be going to the general election in the state of Utah, coming this November. It's going to be a very interesting midterm around the entire country. But, best of luck to you in that race, January. For those who are interested, those links that she just mentioned will be in the episode description. So go ahead and click into there now, and you will see those links. Thank you to everyone for checking out this episode of Independent Thought. We will see you in the next one.